I actually confess, when you said the Warrior Princess, I thought you were going to say Xena, the Warrior Princess. Hey, welcome everyone to Season 2 of the Navigating an Ancient Faith podcast. My name is David, and with me, as always, is JR. JR, you signed on for Season 2.
Yeah, there we go. Back for Season 2. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, another season of interesting conversations, at least between you and I, if anyone else.
Yeah, I wasn't sure my contract was going to be renewed, but I'm glad that worked out.
Yeah, NAF decided to go ahead and renew your contract, and mine too. So,
yeah, man, I got a good agent. That's a benefit. Shout out to him.
Yeah, so Season 2, this is fun. It's a bit of a milestone. We talked about it at the end of last season, what a milestone it was, 20 episodes, get that season under your belt, and now we're going to start on Season 2.
Yeah. All right. So where are we taking it?
So today's going to be a bit of an intro roadmap of where Season 2 is going. We're going to talk about some of the things that we're excited to jump right in and talk about on Season 2. But really, we're going to start off by an exercise that I found helpful, and that is just discussing a couple of the resources maybe that you and I have individually found helpful over this past year, calendar year, because we're recording this. It's the holiday season. So we'll get into that too. But just the resources that have helped us grow in our thinking, spiritually, theologically, philosophically, any kind of resource like that.
Right.
Just to say, here's what has influenced me over the past year. Okay. So we'll have a chance to talk about that. One of the reasons why I think this is helpful is that I have enjoyed looking back and seeing how my own thinking has developed. And I think it's one of those things that maybe as a Christian, you think, well, this is what the Bible says, this is what I believe, and that shouldn't change. But I know I've enjoyed looking back and saying what I believed 5 years ago differs from what I believe today. Now, not in the fundamentals, but the whole thinking that shapes the way I read the Bible and my faith. It's different from 10 years ago. It's different from 20 years ago, right?
Yeah. Well, it's like you said that you kind of say, well, shouldn't it remain the same? Truth doesn't change, those types of things. But the truth is, we kind of go on a path. I mean, this whole thing's a journey, and we see things differently than in other parts of life. And so it's no surprise that I view the Bible a little bit differently than when I was 20, certainly.
Right.
Yeah. And I think when you grow up in church, you sacrifice understanding for obedience maybe. And this is probably true for anything that claims to outline morality in any significant way, And maybe I should say that there's a shift from obedience to understanding, not that I sacrifice one for the other, but there's kind of a shift. I think about the proverb that starts off that says that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. Right. And I think the key word in that is, you can focus on what fear means and what does it mean to fear God, but I think the key word is the beginning. Like it's the start of the journey.
Good,
and it culminates
that's good
with
call
wisdom.
Out. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it kind of goes from fear, which is what a child needs. An immature person needs to fear his father because the father's protecting him. But the goal is to kind of move toward obedience, and then toward something like knowledge, and then to wisdom, and really ultimately holiness. And so it's more of this path that we're on that I like to think of. And so, yes, I've kind of seen that myself. I've seen this shift from obedience, maybe I should say knowledge to wisdom. Maybe I'll give myself a little bit credit, maybe that I'm further along the journey. That it's not merely about knowledge. It's a little bit about applying the knowledge and more wisdom behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's slow going, but I'd like to think I'm a little further along in the depth of knowledge and understanding than I was, 5 or 10 years ago. And
yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. So, part of that is just saying that's kind of the idea behind this, is to reflect back and say, what resources have influenced me? How have I changed in my thinking? And maybe depth is a better way to say that because, at the core of our beliefs, those don't change, but really my understanding of them, the depth of my understanding, the wider application of it, all that changes and deepens. And so, this is just a little exercise that I like to do at the beginning of each new year or at the end of a year. But we are in the holiday season, so let me start out by just saying, how's the holiday season progressing?
So far, so good. So far, so good. Yeah, look, we'll be catching up with you in Tallahassee.
That's right.
Getting the family together. So that's coming up. And man, it's always crazy. I'm glad we take a break during this time because it's just so chaotic. There's work parties and Friendsgiving and
I know.
Thanksgiving, and there's so much going on. I can't imagine having to fit in episodes during all this.
Yeah, that's true.
So, yeah. And then that's why you get to New Year's and you look back at the last 2 months and say, man, I've gotten out of shape and I've eaten too much. And same thing with the podcast. Man, we got to get back on track.
Yeah. All my goals went out the window. Yeah. That's
exactly.
why New Year's resolutions. I've got to get back on track. Yeah, exactly. So let's start out by, I'll throw it out to you first. Okay. So what is, both of us like to read, and if it's a book or an author or more of an idea, but I'll throw it out to you first. What's one big thing that has influenced you over this past year?
Man, there's so many of them. I'll tell you what, I think I've mentioned it before in previous podcasts, but The Unseen Realm by Michael Heiser, I've read now a few books of his, Reversing Herman and The Unseen Realm. Those are really, really, it's one of those books that when you get through it, you find yourself for the next several months, it shapes the lens that you view the Bible through. To clarify, The Unseen Realm, it kind of discusses the hidden supernatural elements throughout the Bible, right? It explores...
Yeah, it's reclaiming the spiritual realm, the supernatural element throughout the Bible.
Right, yeah.
With a proper understanding of how to read it and how to understand it,
Right, yeah. And so many times as I was reading this, it kind of challenges, my traditional interpretation sometimes of what I thought verses meant. And he does a great job. He takes an extremely scholarly approach. And so this is not just one guy's opinion about what Revelation means or something like that. It's very scholarly, and he just gave me a new lens to read the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, kind of through this supernatural context. And it gave me a more, that depth that you were talking about, a more deeper, a more nuanced interpretation of Scripture, and it helped me kind of grasp the broader spiritual significance of primarily the Old Testament.
Right, yeah. I would agree with that.
That's great. Yeah. Have you read... I think you've read The Unseen Realm, right?
The Unseen Realm. I just finished Angels and Reversing Herman. That's another one. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So, yeah, that's
Demons is on my list. It's downloaded to my Kindle. So there you go. That'll be my 2024 influential book, maybe.
Right. No, I would agree with that. We kind of read that at the same time. It's funny because I don't think we said, hey, you should read this next, but I think we both just kind of are working our way through the books that Heiser has put out. But
I'm not sure how I even stumbled across him. I don't know if you brought him up to me or I brought him up to you. I don't know.
I think I brought him up, and I kind of forget how I came across it, but I just remember that I just got his book and started reading it, and I thought, man, this is great. And I heard on another podcast, actually, that at that very same time, like within weeks, that he had passed away.
Right. Yeah. And so, the same thing.
So little bit of
a heartbreaking thing. It's like, man, I want to know what this guy has to say.
I know. It's like I just found this guy and he just passed.
he's gone already.
Right. Yeah.
So he's been influential, and there's other authors, but he kind of sums up the idea of just the lens of how to read the Old Testament. I'll say it that way. And of course, our trip to Greece and, our trips, it started off with Egypt. When did we go to Egypt? It's been 10 years. I don't know. But all our travels and things like that. So we started off, we went to Egypt, and you knew a lot about Egyptian mythology. And I remember a conversation that you and I had, and I said, because you kept explaining of this is what this God does, and he takes you to the underworld and through these means and all this kind of stuff. And I remember saying, man, who made this stuff up? I remember having that conversation with you and said, did somebody just pull it out of thin air and said, this is how, and so it started off with understanding a little bit more about Egyptology. And then we went to Greece. I understood more about mythology and started reading a lot about that. And that's when it started to click that it's a way to explain how the world works the best way they knew how, through the oral tradition.
Yes. And
when I saw that, it actually helped me read the Bible in a different way. And so again, Michael Heiser helped that, mythology helped that.
Yeah.
So that's sort of like my 2023 journey, kind of the shift in the way I read the Bible. And you and I were talking the other day about Judges, and I think we're going to do a series on that this year. But yeah, I was telling you, man, I can't wait to read Judges now. When who would have? I wouldn't have said that in 2022. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have said that. But yeah, because of this new lens, this idea of what's the deeper meaning behind what I originally kind of understood the surface text to say, and I'm finding all these patterns and all these interesting deeper meanings. So that's sort of my 2023 transition.
Okay. No, that's interesting. I've been in a similar journey. I would say the concepts that Heiser was writing about was not my first introduction, but the way he wrote about it brought it all together, and it helped me understand that, okay, so we take the stories of the Bible at face value, and when you read it that way, it's just, story, this story, this story, this story. Underlying all that, I think I'm coming to an appreciation that there is a much larger, grander narrative happening in the spiritual realm.
Right.
That is very easy to miss. I guess that's how I would say that.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, look, this year I've really loved reading the Old Testament, and maybe for the first time. I've always kind of avoided the Old Testament, other than obviously Genesis and Exodus. You kind of, that ties into the narrative. But I don't say I don't read the Old Testament. It's just difficult. It's difficult to fit into the modern New Testament biblical paradigm, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of this stuff doesn't seem to connect. And so, yeah, this year I've really loved reading the Old Testament for the first time. And I have a better understanding of what the Old Testament writers were trying to do, in that they were trying to explain both human nature and spiritual nature, along with the lineages and histories and things like that. But they really are trying to explain the spiritual realm and human nature through a lot of these stories.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to see this.
Yeah, yeah. And that opens up the whole Old Testament to you once you start seeing that. Agreed.
Yeah. Oh, here's something interesting that I kind of, and this ties into an article that I've read, but here's something that I've learned is that in the Old Testament, there's three major false gods, right? Well, there's several of them, but three major ones. Baal is one of them. You hear a lot of mention of Baal,
mm-hmm.
and you hear a lot of mention of Ashtoreth, and the third one is Moloch. And Baal you worship to sort of achieve prosperity, maybe. He falsely promises freedom over the constraints of morality, or, get away from God, and he promises freedom, right? And that's sort of the understanding of Baal. And then Ashtoreth is also Aphrodite in the Greek mythologies, and Venus in the Roman mythologies, and she offers sexual freedom. She kind of opens the door for sexual freedom, and if you worship her, that's what you achieve. And then Moloch, ties in with Kronos. And he's he's the destroyer, and he's the one that people used to sacrifice their children to him, things like that.
Right.
And I understood this through the help of some writings, that one leads to the other, right? You never hear Ashtoreth. You virtually never hear Ashtoreth without talking about Baal. So it's Baal and Ashtoreth, right? And it's because Baal leads to Ashtoreth. And then once you invite those two spiritual deities into your culture, the end is destruction. The end is Moloch. And before long, you're sacrificing your children to sexual freedom, to prosperity, and one ushers in the next, And so the ultimate end to allowing Baal and Ashtoreth into your culture is Moloch, and you literally give up your children. And I thought about that, like if that doesn't overlay our current modern Western culture, then I'm not sure what does. And I've heard all those names before, but I've never heard it all tied together. And so it's kind of this, to go back to this mythological lens, and you tie it into, and I won't go down that road about Venus and the warrior princess and things like that. But when you tie it in through that mythological narrative, you really do see the pattern a lot clearer, that one ushers in the next. And so that's kind of a good example of something I've read in the Old Testament recently that just popped out at me after I have kind of had this understanding of the spiritual realm and how those play out in the physical realm and culture.
Okay. Yeah, so I actually confess, when you said the warrior princess, I thought you were going to say Xena, the warrior princess. I think she comes along later, though.
Yeah, I'm not sure where she ties in. That's the videos, or that's the TV show that has been influential to you in 2023. You've gone back and rewatched Xena, Warrior Princess.
Well, maybe like 1983, but
Yeah.
I don't know when that, I think it was the 80s, right?
It might be 90s. I don't know.
Kevin Sorbo as Hercules and then Xena Warrior Princess. So.
Oh, you actually watched it. All I know is just,
of course I watched
it. Commercials. Yeah.
Well,
see, that's where you got your foundation of mythology. I never watched that. I should have started back then.
Right. Those shows were much deeper than I actually realized when I was watching them.
Well, they actually probably are.
They probably
no kidding.
are.
Not to give props to Xena, but
Well, it does actually tie into something I was going to mention. If I kind of move to, I would say one of the influential authors on me in this past year has been an author by the name of Louis Markos. And he's written a series of books. I'm not sure when they came out, but I just discovered them. But the first one I read was The Myth Made Fact. It's kind of playing off a cute C.S. Lewis quote.
Okay, yeah.
So he really espouses this idea that there's a lot that we can learn as Christians and take from Greek culture, the Greek myths, the Greek heroes, right?
Yeah.
And so I've really appreciated his book, The Myth Made Fact. He wrote a second one called From Plato to Christ, which kind of links Greek philosophy to Christian thinking. And I am about to finish one called From Achilles to Christ, which really links these Greek heroes to, he would say, almost a precursory understanding of the Christian faith. And
oh, wow. Okay.
That may all sound weird, but when you read his books, he really gives you permission. And he's a evangelical seminary professor somewhere, but he really gives you permission to actually see these as laying the groundwork for the Christian faith. And the way it ties into what you just said is, I would say, you talked about Baal and Ashtaroth and Moloch. It's almost like this progression downward, right?
Right. Yeah.
Well, he almost sees the Greek culture and the Greek myths and the Greek heroes as a progression toward the Christian faith. So it's almost kind of the opposite. That's why I say there's a bit of a tie-in here.
Okay,
and so I've just really enjoyed almost someone from the Christian realm, a Christian thinker, almost giving permission to embrace and study Greek philosophy, Greek mythology, and actually see these as pointers to Christ.
Yeah.
Not standing in opposition.
Yeah.
Right, to the Christian faith, which a lot of times it's how it's presented.
Well, I'm glad you said that. Gives you permission, because one of the things we've said on who knows how many podcasts, we have to kind of put our own disclaimer and say, we're not saying yeah. that we don't believe that this part of the Bible isn't true or something. We've had these conversations.
Yes.
But yeah, the idea, and I think you're right about the Greek mythology. You said that it helps you understand the Old Testament. And I would go a step further and say, without understanding Greek mythology, you miss a large amount of what the Old Testament is trying to tell you.
Yeah, mythology in general.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, but yes, an understanding of mythology almost as a genre helps you understand some of what you're reading in the Old Testament. Again, my gut reaction is start to go, now, disclaimer, but we should probably move away from that. I think we kind of made ourselves clear on that. But yes, it does. It helps in your understanding of what you're reading.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're saying this guy gives you permission to do that, which is well said.
Yeah.
You need to send me that book.
Yeah, I'll send it your way.
Definitely.
It's something it was a road I was going down anyway, kind of reading more of Plato, really fascinated by mythology because of, our Greece trip. So it was kind of refreshing to run across an author who just said, yeah, man, totally embrace this and help it strengthen your faith. And really the origins of where he's coming from reach back to guys like G.K. Chesterton, C.S. Lewis, who that's what they did.
Right.
And we kind of forget that aspect of what they were doing, but that's exactly what Chesterton and C.S. Lewis were doing as well.
Right. They both had roots in romantic languages and mythology, and they both had roots in medieval literature. And, you can kind of see where they pull a lot of their views from. And when we read Chesterton, or at least when I read Chesterton and Lewis, I'm thinking, man, how in the world do they come up with this brilliant insight on something that I've read 100 times,
right? Yeah,
and never got that right, And so much of it, I think you're right. I think it's right. I think it's from their deep understanding of medieval literature and mythology.
Yeah, they were into it. They studied it. How do you think Lewis came up with the Narnia series, and
right.
so much of that is just retelling Greek myths.
Yeah, the hero's journey.
Yeah, the hero's journey, and same thing with Chesterton. And so, yeah, I think Louis Markos has really helped me in a modern perspective reach back to Lewis and Chesterton, who have reached back to the Greek myths and Greek philosophy and said, yeah, none of this has to stand at odds. This can help actually strengthen your faith, strengthen what your understanding is of the Bible without it being in conflict, right?
Right.
Now,
yes.
It was an incomplete understanding. Let me say that.
Right.
It was an incomplete understanding, but it's what laid the groundwork for really the Greco-Roman world eventually becoming so receptive to the Christian message was
right.
because of that groundwork.
Yeah, and that understanding just helps you understand the way ancients communicated in general.
Right. Yeah.
And so Louis Markos, right?
Yes.
I said send me the book, but then I realized you do ebooks, and so
yeah,
I'm just going to have to download to my Kindle. I'm just going to have to pony up the money.
I'm sure there's a way to share ebooks. And I've read about some ways you've got to remove it from your library, but you've got to also have a version that you can send to some. But the whole point is they make it a pain to actually share. But that is one of the downsides.
Yeah, some of our listeners out there are thinking, dude, it's so easy. All you got to do is So if you know how to bootleg this stuff, let us know. We'd love to know it.
or do it legally. Yeah. We'd be open to that too.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. All right, so we talked about a couple of authors and books. What else? What else has influenced you in the past year? You got anything else you want to share? Well, I'll jump in and say, actually, because I know this influenced both of us, but I think at the beginning of this year, the Daily Wire released the Exodus series.
Oh, yeah.
Where Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Pageau, who were some of the other people?
Dennis Prager.
Yes. Os Guinness.
Yeah.
I mean, these are pretty big thinkers. Greg Hurwitz, which I enjoyed Hurwitz coming in.
Yeah, I had never heard of him before until this series, and I really I started looking him up. Is he the Hollywood?
He was in Hollywood.
Writer?
I guess he's written a bunch of novels. He produces movie, video, things like that.
But he really has a good grip on understanding narrative.
Right, yeah.
On the rise and fall of narrative. And he pulled that in several times, and I thought he was really interesting. No, I'm glad you brought that up, because Exodus seems like, well, it was at the beginning of the year, so it was a good ways back. But man, that is such a fantastic series.
Yeah, really just an exercise. Seeing these, I would say, great minds, people who have influenced me, and just to see that very different perspective mix with the traditional perspectives of someone like an Os Guinness, just sit there and talk about all the stories in Exodus and all the different ways you can read it. That's like mind
and just
candy
watching
to me,
them.
so.
Yeah, I know. And these guys come from such diverse backgrounds and disciplines, and they brought their own educated understanding to reading the Exodus story. It's kind of a neat format to have these. It wasn't a round table of different pastors and preachers.
Right.
I mean, it was philosophers and psychiatrists and, like I said, Hollywood narrative writers and pastors, and they all bring what they understand to the table. And when you see all that overlaid, what it showed me is that, man, there are so many layers to how to read the Bible. If anybody says, here's how you should read the Bible, well, that's a big red flag. Move on.
Yeah.
Because there's so many different layers.
One of 50 ways. Yeah.
Exactly. And they kind of, like you said, they gave me permission to open up a new layer and understanding that it doesn't undo my previous understanding of the Exodus story or something like that, but it does give me another layer, another lens to add to it. And you see that, man, this is so multifaceted, these ancient biblical stories. And when you have guys like that, these brilliant guys from different disciplines breaking that story down, that's where you can really see it and think, wow, this is not, John Grisham. This is something so much deeper and so much more profound.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This is not just a good tale. This is something that has so many layers and so many facets, and I really appreciated what they tackled and pulled out of it.
Yeah, and I'll tack on one more thing to what you just said, which is when you see these super smart people actually coming from different perspectives and actually having some argument and disagreement over how should I read this portion. man, it makes me go back and say, okay, here's the way to read this. I probably need to back up, and there's probably 10 different ways to read it. But I just really appreciate the back and forth, the disagreement, the different perspectives. And similar to something you said earlier in this podcast is, it makes me want to go back and read other parts of the Bible because I'm certain that I've missed a ton of stuff in certain parts of the Bible.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think it kind of, that really did, now that I think about it, that kind of launched 2023 for me. And that's sort of that journey that I've been going on, is that rereading the Bible. I have a renewed interest in the Bible that I haven't had in a long time.
That's awesome.
And yeah, so much of it is because of these different facets and way of viewing something.
Yeah, yeah. And frankly, we try and bring a little bit of that to this podcast. And before that Exodus series even came out, that's kind of what we envisioned at a very, very, very small scale, not nearly the brain power of a table like that, but yeah.
How long? It was like 16 hours. I forget what it was. It may be longer than that, but 16 episodes, 2 hours apiece. So 30 hours of this stuff. So we're not going to that depth, but
yeah. All right. So what else? Anything else? Anything like, I don't know, Netflix or YouTube or
Netflix. You don't want to know what I watch on Netflix.
Okay.
I just finished A Small Light. Very good. It's about the Holocaust. It's kind of the
Anne
Frank
story.
Yeah,
what is that?
Yeah, it's worth seeing. It is the Holocaust story, the Anne Frank story, but it's not. Anne Frank is in it, but it's not told from her perspective. It's told from the perspective of Miep. I forget her last name. But basically, the woman that hid the Frank family in her attic, and was instrumental in that. So it's kind of a different angle on the Anne Frank story. It's fantastic. Man, it was really good.
Okay.
So check that one out. That was good. It doesn't really tie into our podcast anyway, but it's a great story.
No, that's all right. The series that I'm working my way through, I don't know if you've seen this. I really, and again, this doesn't really tie into our podcast or have any deep theological meaning, but
wait a second. Is it in foreign language?
No.
You always suggest these Netflix series that that have subtitles or
I do. I could suggest a couple of good foreign films that I really truly enjoyed, and actually kind of the whole mythology theme. But I won't get into that because that's going to be.
I'm probably missing something, but I just can't do it. Because I'll pull it up and I'll think, "Oh man, this has subtitles. I can't do this."
Oh, okay, yeah. You're eliminating a bunch of good TV all of a sudden.
know. No, I just don't have that artistic vein, I guess. Okay, I interrupted. Go ahead.
Well, so one of the themes of shows that I like has to do with, and it kind of sounds morbid at first, but it has to do with the whole idea of the Middle Eastern world and kind of the modern war on terrorism.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Just the reason is because not just from the terrorism aspect, again, that's a whole different thing, but the understanding of a vastly different culture and understanding the inner workings and, how it does intersect on our trips every now and then. My favorite example of this is it's going to be one of those shows that we just talked about. It's Fauda, right?
Okay, yeah.
Voiceover, it's an Israeli show, but absolutely.
Well, at least it's in English. I can handle the
fantastic.
Yeah.
Insight into that world. But as I tried to find more series, one of the ones that kept coming up is Homeland. Have you ever watched Homeland?
Homeland, yeah. Claire Danes, I think. Is that right? I saw that I saw it several years ago. I don't know if I got through the first season. How many seasons?
I was surprised. There were 8 seasons. I've never watched it. I've heard about it a ton. Anytime you Google, shows on Middle Eastern affairs, terrorism, things like that, Homeland is always up there with Fauda. And so, but I was like, okay, I'm going to watch
binging
this.
now is what is.
And I was surprised to see 8 seasons. I'm like, okay, I got a lot of episodes.
Yes, I'm catching it. No, but that's what I like to see, because probably the reason I stopped watching it is because I had to wait week to week for the next episode, and it just doesn't fit into my the way I consume media now, I guess.
Okay.
I have to binge it. So, that'll be worth watching. But it kind of ties in. I mean, listen, when Hamas is making headlines and terrorism is making headlines, there's sort of a Western view that wants to get your head wrapped around what drives that mentality. Who goes in and does these things? And we want to kind of understand terrorism. And I think it's overly simplistic in the West to sort of paint it as simple good versus evil. And I'm not saying that there's not an aspect of that going on, but you're saying that both of these shows probably give you a little bit deeper understanding of the culture that drives that.
They're a bit more nuanced than simply hey, America's going to go win the war on terror. Like it's a bit more nuanced than that. It shows kind of the pitfalls, the tensions, the moral conundrums.
Yeah. They hate us because of our freedom, right?
Yeah, yeah. And,
a little bit deeper than that.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So I've enjoyed that. I think I'm in season 5 right now. But Claire Danes, you said Claire Danes, she's the main character. I like her character because she's very good at what she does. She's also a very flawed individual in her personal life. And so you always see kind of this tension between all of her many flaws, her demons.
Yeah.
But, her ability to then go do what she does, what she's gifted at, I guess you would say. But yeah, I'm enjoying that show. Again, not
okay, I'm going to put it on my list. I'll queue it up. Yeah.
I'm enjoying it. Yeah. And it's one of those two, like, Fought is kind of a condensed version of it, but it's one of those two where every time you watch an episode or two and you think, it's getting a little slow, like something big happens and you just think, oh, wow, they just went there. Or I just watched that happen on, so yeah, enjoying that. So.
Okay. Better than Breaking Bad or no?
You're going to get mad at me. I never could finish Breaking Bad.
Oh, I can't believe that.
I know. Well, I lost my Netflix sign in and had to re-sign in, and then I lost actually where I was, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to.
So you were stealing Netflix from somebody else, and they cracked down on it.
No, that's not it.
That's not how you roll? Okay.
No, that's not. Anyway.
It's how my kids roll.
Okay.
And both of them had called me and said, what's the deal with Netflix? I'm like, dude, they're cracking down. They, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, you mean
You're
that
grown-ups.
thing you don't pay for?
Yeah.
I did that actually with Spotify. So I just called you a couple weeks ago. Yeah. What's the deal with Spotify? Because I'm on your family plan.
Yeah. Now that's straight up. That's legal.
Yeah, okay.
But no, that was a identity theft card situation that I had to update. So yeah, I apologize if I messed up your Joe Rogan.
No, yeah. Well, it made me realize how much I enjoy Spotify. And if you said, hey, I got to drop you from my plan, I would say, all right, I've got to go subscribe myself. So.
Okay, so 2024, you'll get the family plan and just send me the link. Is that what I hear?
No, we'll edit that out. This conversation never happened.
There you go.
Yeah. All right. Well.
All right. So where are we going this year then?
Yeah, season 2. Let's do a quick overview of where we think we're headed. Always subject to change, but yeah, sure. Season 2. So we're going to start out earlier in the season is more set, but we're going to start out with an overview of Philippians. And I have to say the reason why is because, God willing, I'm going to finish up formatting and editing and all that.
I was going to say, I thought you were done.
And, the text. But yeah, I have a book coming out called A Journey Through Philippi.
Right.
And so
you and I went there.
You and I went there. So there's a bunch of angles here, a little bit to do a little bit of that promotion for the release of that book. But yeah, you and I went there. We have a lot of insights. And we did this with Colossians last season.
Right.
That I really enjoyed. In fact, one of the things I said is that, man, I wish I could go back and add things to that book, A Journey Through Colossae, that I also wrote. Right. After our discussions, right? So,
yeah.
But yeah, so we're going to talk about the big themes in each of the 4 chapters in the book of Philippians. It's going to tie into our time there. It's going to tie into the book. So I think that'll be good.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
A couple other series that we're going to tackle. There's a couple of episodes that we're going to talk about this idea of what is truth.
Oh, yeah. I'm looking forward to that. And just our casual conversations on that. You gave me kind of an outline of it, and I thought, no, this is great. I love this. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, one of those topics where I kind of did some thinking and some outlining, and you and I talked, and you've added to it. And, yeah, it's one of these things where I'm like, all right, we just need to do a couple of episodes on this idea of what is truth. So we'll tackle that.
Sometimes things are like so, fundamental and foundational that it's difficult to describe because we all think that everyone knows what a word or idea means. And truth is one of the, or good. What does good mean?
Yeah.
If I talk about a good movie, well, I think you know what that means. But, the bigger picture of what truth means, what good means. Yeah, I think this is necessary. I think it'll be really helpful.
Yeah, it's helped me personally because I agree with that. Truth tends to be one of those things you say, well, look, it's either true or not, right? The Bible talks about one truth. And it's maybe a little more nuanced than that. So we'll talk about that.
I could run down this road right now, but let's save it.
All right, let's move on then before we have a whole episode right in the middle of this one. So
yeah.
And another series that we actually kind of brought up is, so the book of Judges, right? So there's a way of understanding the book of Judges, and you and I, we've had a lot of conversations recently offline about this, and so it's another one of these things that's like, all right, let's just do a series. Let's talk about the Judges, how to understand that little book that sits in the middle of the Torah, Joshua, the conquest of the land, and, Samuel, Chronicles that really gets into the Israelite monarchy, things like that.
Right.
There's this little really weird book of Judges, right?
Yeah. And all of us know stories about Samson.
We know
and
the
Gideon
stories,
and
sure.
Some of the stories, but overall, you're right. It's a complicated book, and there's several strange passages in there. You're like, man, they didn't teach me that in Sunday school.
Yeah.
So we'll dissect some of those. I'm looking forward to that one as well.
Yeah. Rolling into the fall, and this becomes more subject to change, but I want to do a series on the gospel announcement. What is the gospel? And there's several aspects of that idea. Again, one of those things that you go, well, yeah, we know what the gospel is, right? Accept Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior, but it's much more nuanced than that. I've learned a lot from understanding that this idea of gospel is not unique to Christianity. It's kind of borrowed. Yeah, it's kind of borrowed from Greek and Roman idea. In fact, there's this very Roman idea of what the gospel is.
Okay, see, sounds like you're being controversial again.
Maybe, yeah. So, what's the gospel? What's the context? Things like, what does it mean to reign with God? Are we going to heaven? What does heaven mean? So we'll get into that. That's going to be a good series, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that sounds interesting to me too.
And then I just added this in during our pre-conversation here. Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about a couple of Stranger Things ideas, right?
In this day and time, there's always strange things popping up. So
plenty of material when it comes to Stranger Things, right?
Oh yeah, no doubt. So we can talk about we talked about virtual reality and some other things. Yeah, I love those conversations. That'll be fun.
So we'll kind of do a part 2. Maybe that'll be an annual thing.
Yeah, okay, that sounds
Stranger
good.
Things. And then
strange things from 2024.
Right. And then at the very end, we plan to wrap up. And again, this is God willing, and I'm putting some pressure on you here, but we've been talking about going back to Greece. So
definitely.
There's a placeholder for the last several episodes of, now that we've been once, I think we can do some episodes more on the fly. We know a little bit more about the content we'd like to do. But if we go to Greece next October, which is what we've been talking about, we will obviously have 3 or 4 episodes around observations, our travels, bring you insights from where we go. So that should be fun.
Yeah, no, you don't have to twist my arm on that. That's
all right. Good.
I'm down for that. So let's book it.
And me, I'm already planning. I'm already booking hotels and got an itinerary.
Well, you make it easy. All I do is just say, look, man, how much do I need to Venmo you? And then what airport do I need to be at on what day? You usually take care of all that stuff. So that's very convenient.
Yeah. No, I always throw some stuff together and it's like, all right, here's a chance for your input. You're like, nope, just tell me what flight to board.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. And then I hit TripAdvisor and throw some things out there.
Yeah. Well, so that's an overview of season 2. Again, that's subject to change. We always might run into something that's particularly a burning issue or on our minds, so we're always subject to, switch some things around. But that's where we're kind of headed in season 2, and I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I can't wait. That'll be fun. Yeah, I'm sure we have plenty of other rabbit trails to go down.
Yeah. More rabbit trails to explore.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so here we go. We'll kick it off.
Yeah. We will start in a couple of weeks. Well, in the virtual world, I guess. We will start with Philippians. We'll start recording that. But we'll also have some different ways we've been talking about of how to get you as the audience more involved. So we'll be talking about some of those too as we kick off the Philippians series. But yeah, like to hear more of your input, more of your topics, and we want to make it easier for you to chime in. We'll be taking maybe some questions.
Yeah,
we might
Q&A
tack on
thing
some
would
of
be
that.
fun.
Yeah. So as always, Navigating Ancient Faith, our website, obviously the podcast, the Facebook group. That's the way to contact us, but we'll make it easier as well in coming episodes about how to discuss all that. And thanks for listening.
There we go. That sounds good. We'll see y'all next week.